If you would, we're going to be in the prophet Jeremiah today. We're starting in chapter 33. For me, it's page 1284. Jeremiah, if you just basically kind of go just around the middle of your Bible, you're generally pretty close. It's the longest book in the Old Testament by a pretty large margin, so just flip around a little bit. But I'm going to give you some background information for the book of Jeremiah and what's going on with him and what he's writing about, and before we kind of dive into this really classic verse section for Christmas season. So This is chapter 32. I'm going to kind of summarize to bring us into 33. The siege had tightened like a noose around Jerusalem. The Babylonian watchfires flickered beyond the exterior walls, and every day their armies inched closer and closer and closer. Inside the city, fear hung in the air like smoke. People whispered about the starvation of disease and streets soon to be littered with the bodies of those around them. And in the palace courtyard, imprisoned by his own king, sat the prophet Jeremiah, waiting. King Zedekiah had locked Jeremiah in the court of the guard because he refused to stop proclaiming a message that no one around him wanted to hear. Babylon was going to conquer Jerusalem. The king would be taken captive, and their resistance was futile. It was treason to their ears, yet truth to Jeremiah. But one day, as the siege around them raged, the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah with an unexpected command. His cousin would soon come to visit him and ask him to buy a field, and Jeremiah was to purchase it. The request came just as God had said, despite the absurdity of buying land in a country that was about to fall. Jeremiah obeys. And before witnesses, he weighs out the silver, he signs the deed, and he seals it, and then places the documents in his clay jar so they would last a long time. And it seems rather foolish to invest in a land that would never cultivate, in a nation that would soon be carried off into exile. But this was an act carried out, a symbol of hope. God himself explains, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be brought into this land. That night, Jeremiah confessed God's mighty deeds, acknowledged the justice of the coming judgment, and admitted his confusion. Why buy a field when land is doomed? And God replied by reminding Jeremiah that nothing was too hard to be done. Though destruction was certain, God would one day gather the people from the nations and restore them to their land and give them a new heart, united in reverence for him. He would make an everlasting covenant with them. Now, sometime later, while Jeremiah remained confined, the word of the Lord again comes to Jeremiah. Just outside the walls, Babylon continued tearing down houses to strengthen their siege ramps, and plague and sword ravaged the people of the countryside. But in a grim moment, God spoke words of restoration. He promised that the ruined city would be healed, that the wounds would be bound up, that the scattered exiles would return. The towns that had fallen silent would again echo with laughter, and in places that now echoed with only death, there would be songs of thanksgiving to the Lord. He then promised an even deeper promise. He would restore the Davidic line, that a righteous branch would spring up from David, like a new shoot from a tree stump that seemed like it had died, and that this king would rule with justice and righteousness. Jerusalem would once again live securely under their name. Just as day follows night, declared God, so too would his covenant with David and the priests who served him. When Babylon's armies pressed in and Jerusalem's fate was sealed, God planted the promise of future life. A field purchased in a dying land to become a sign. The prophet imprisoned to become the herald of restoration. And in the deepest darkness of this story, God declared that despair would not keep the final word, that restoration, righteousness, and renewal would rise again, because nothing was too hard. The promises for Jeremiah are spoken in a pretty dire situation. That's 32 into 33. But the armies of one of the biggest Most powerful ancient civilizations are storming in on what remains of the southern kingdom of Judah. So Israel had now split in part, and the northern kingdom had already been wiped out and taken into exile. Here stands the southern kingdom with the lines of the kings of David, being surrounded by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. The streets of Jerusalem were not going to make it. This is what Jeremiah had been saying. You're going to be taken over, and he's imprisoned for the words. He's saying there will be corpses of her people on the streets. Prophets are not generally well liked in the Old Testament. Their job is to deliver a harsh word of the divine into a corrupt people. If you read any of them, there's a reason why they usually find themselves stripped naked, blasting dirt in their face, because they just are miserable. No one will listen to them, and they're imprisoned. There's only one prophet who has a good time with his message, and he's also angry about it. His name's Jonah. If you're ever interested, Jonah's fun to read. He's the only successful prophet in ever. Anyway, so this is his prophecy. He's been locked up for it. Jerusalem's going to be taken over by this massive army of Babylon, and the prophet Jeremiah himself is now imprisoned for speaking this word. This is what generally happens to our prophets. They tell the people in power that you're corrupt, and they get arrested for it. But the worst hasn't happened yet for them, but it's inevitable. And the reason, any reasonable person can look at this situation Jeremiah is in and see that this city is doomed. They are completely and utterly surrounded by an extremely powerful army. There is not a way out of this one. So Jeremiah's many prophecies of judgment, these prophecies that land him in prison, are now beginning to come true. And in the midst of this entire catastrophe, the prophet finally speaks words of a promise. So he's in prison, and he's got these words of promise. He's purchased this piece of land, foolish to do in a country about to be taken over by an invading army, but he's purchased this land as a pledge and as an earnest response of what he believes will be God's redemption of Jerusalem. Advent is a strange season. It stands completely in contrast to this Christmas season that already starts somehow before we go trick-or-treating now. Because it's not Christmas yet. There's a whole season of Christmas once Christmas happens. But Advent is a countdown to Christmas. Whether you envision candy-filled Advent calendars, right, or lights draped over houses and nativity scenes starting to be set out front, Advent is this happy season of celebrating. Christmas music starts playing in the speakers in every store, and they have the gentle jingle bells and the words wishing Christmas and all the mild and comfort and all those things. Fuzzy slippers obviously are going on sale with matching pajama sets, and you move to window displays, to the front store shoppers to see the things we might want to purchase from the parking lot. But Christmas movies, which there are so many movies of, always have gently falling snow that happen at the absolute perfect time, and some hardened character that changes from a joyless Scrooge into a generous, compassionate person who brings joy to others. What a lovely thing that we have. But the expressions of Christmas, those of joy and peace and gentleness, which marks the beginning of Advent, seem so out of place. Especially for this story, a town surrounded and about to be conquered. But the word Advent comes from, you're going to learn Latin today. Side note, I took one semester of Latin in college, undergrad, and I never took another one. It's horrible. It's the worst language ever made. So it comes from the word Adventus, which you have to now say. Adventus. Louder now. Adventus. Great, there we go. Which is about coming or arrival. It's this idea of arriving. The Latin translation of the New Testament uses Adventus to describe God the Son arriving on earth in the birth narrative, born as Jesus in Jerusalem. I'm not close enough to turn the lights on, apparently. Born as Jesus in the first century. I got to find where I'm at now. So arriving on earth, born as Jesus of Nazareth during this first century CE. But all throughout church history, Advent has more traditionally been referred to about Jesus' future arrival, when he comes to complete the work of restoring all of creation. And so this Advent season is really a celebration of the birth, sure, but it's major emphasis on a future arrival. That we are living in a time in between the two Advents. We're living in between the first and the nativity, the birth narrative, and the future coming of the king, riding on the cloud. Whatever you want to picture this. But we live between these two Advent moments. which leads us to lament our hardships that we experience in a world that lives between these two moments. The image I like to, Sandra Richter in Epic of Eden talks about living in between two trees. The tree of life in Genesis and the tree of life in Revelation. We live in between these. It's this strange moment where we're still in a broken world, this fallenness, and we're still being formed into people who wait for the longing and renewedness to fully come. And so celebrating Advent means living into this idea by practicing this generous way of love and caring for our neighbors as a partnership to bring this peace to earth in between these two Advent moments. And so every year, if you follow the liturgical calendar, the first readings for the week of Advent are about warnings and prophecy. And they come out of this dramatic and difficult situation. And with Jeremiah in particular, I feel like preachers everywhere scratch their heads, wondering how these pronouncements from prophets could possibly speak words of life into this society where Christmas music starts on October 31st and is ready for gentle, mild, warm, fuzzy slippers with copious cups of hot chocolate and dozens of Hallmark movies. Maybe I'm the only one who struggles with, look at the roof line out there. How warm and cozy and comfy does that feel? And Jeremiah is like, you're about to be murdered by the Babylonians. Welcome to Christmas. Hi. Right? I might be the only one who has this problem, or I'm showing my inner Scrooge for how early Christmas starts. But Jeremiah 33 is the usual verse. So I'm going to read 14 and 16, and this is the prescribed reading for Advent. So it's 33, 14 through 16. So remember, he's bought his field, they are surrounded by armies, and they're about to be overcome and sent into exile, and then Jeremiah writes this. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the good promise I made to the people of Israel and Judah. In those days, at that time, I will make a righteous branch sprout from David's line. He will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, Jerusalem will live in safety, and the name by which will be called the Lord our righteous Savior. Jeremiah is writing, right, about this coming restoration, this restoration of the normal, everyday life, that when Babylon won't be in the streets. There'll be a time that will come in the land of Judah, the southern kingdom, right? And there will once again, in the later right, there'll be heard the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom and the voices of the bride echoing in the streets. So in this passage, Jeremiah speaks of this restoration not simply to daily life, but also one of the chief signs of God's coming favor, this restoration of the line of David. The righteous branch that will sprout from the stump of Jesse, this lineage of David. This is the image of hope that the author gives us. That new life springs out of what looks like death, a tree cut at the stump. That David has finally arrived. And what's he going to do? Well, he is going to decide, I wanted to explain this a little bit. So if you're unfamiliar with this whole Davidic line and why this is important, I just didn't put a note in there. That's what I was going to do here. I just wrote David arrived, and then so if you're less familiar with it, if you've never read the book of 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel, and you're like, I know David, but I don't know. I always hear this stump of Jesse and this line of David, but why is that important? David is the chosen king of this unified kingdom of Israel. And David is, after running for his life for the entirety of 1 Samuel, basically, has finally arrived on the scene and has been brought in as the king. He's been anointed. They poured oil over his head, and the priest says, this is who we've chosen. And the first thing he wants to do is he's going to build God a big fancy house, one that's as pretty as his. David looks around and he sees he's got gold walls and all this beautiful cedar and all these things. He goes, I'm going to build a temple for God because he deserves it. And so he calls in Nathan, the prophet, my favorite of the Old Testament prophets here, and he says, look, I got a big fancy house. I have ivory plaques and all this cool stuff, and God should live in a really cool house too. And right now he lives in a tent, the tabernacle. It's just like sticks and whatever, and he should have something better. So David had moved the tabernacle into the capital city, but God is in tent curtains, and I live in a palace of gold and silver, and so we need to do something about this. And Nathan hears this and he goes, that's fabulous. That's a great idea. That's a great idea, David. You should go do it. This is the participatory. Does Nathan, before he gives this response to David, ask God if he should do this? Say no. No. Does David ask God before he tries to build a temple? No, he doesn't do that. So we're going to get him in trouble here in just a second. And so when Nathan comes back, he's received a vision from God, and God basically says, "Did I ask for a temple, David? Did I want one? Why do you think you get to tell me, right? You were following sheep. I made you the king of everything. I'm the one that made you famous. I was giving you this throne. What are you doing, David? I didn't ask for this." And David responds, says, "I want to build God a house." But there's a play on words in the Hebrew here, and God can understand that David's not worried about God in this situation. Because when kings come into the throne, the first thing they do is they build a thing for the patron deity that got them their kingship. So you build big pyramids, or you build a big tabernacle, or you build a big temple for the deity that you think got you on the throne. And so this is what David is doing. He's trying to secure the power of God on his side. If I build him a big fancy house, he's not going to leave me. He'll be my patron deity and support my kingdom, and then I'll have a dynasty. You see this is what he's doing. And so this is tricky because if you remember the story, David is a usurper of the throne. There was a king before him that he booted out of the kingship to get onto the throne. So he's a little worried that same thing might happen to him. And so if there's another usurper behind the throne, I need God on my side. I'll build him a big house, keep him with me. Do you see? You with me? Okay. I'll put him right there. This is common culture in the ancient Near East, and so you build temples to keep gods happy. And so God trashes him for this idea, because he can see through it. He says, "I didn't ask for it, I don't want it, you're not going to build this. When I want a temple, I'll ask for a temple." And so David, what you're really concerned about is you're not concerned about my house, my temple, where I live. You're concerned about yours. In Hebrew, the word house is also temple. So there's a play on words back and forth in this little section here. Palace, it can mean palace, it can mean house, it can mean temple, or it can also mean lineage, like inside of a house, like the house of someone, right? The house of Usher, if that helps you think that through. And so he said, "What about your house, David? Because that's what you really want to know that I secure." And so in 2 Samuel 7, God takes care of what David's really worried about. He promises a dynasty, he promises his loyalty, and he seals the deal with a covenant with David. And so a couple things to pay attention to, and this is what is going to come through in all the rest of these weeks with Advent. One of the promises is about a promise for forever. So say forever. It basically says your house, your kingdom, your dynasty will endure forever. And David had a really long dynasty, like 400 years or so. But no one's dynasty endures forever. David is dead. And the ancient Israelite kingdom doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's gone. It's not there. You couldn't find yourself a descendant of David right now if you absolutely had to. The Babylonians destroyed David's city, they burned Solomon's temple, and they took David's heirs into exile, and the promises of God seem to come to an end. That's our first one. And so we get this promise of his throne living forever. To the people devastated by this loss, this is where Jeremiah's prophecy sees this hope. The stump has now been cut down. But from the stump, there'll be a branch, a little sprout of this lineage that has happened. This is his Jeremiah 33:14-16. From the stump I will continue this lineage. This promised person who will rule in the lineage of David in a forever kingdom. Now, humans are pretty cool, and I think lifespans have gotten pretty long. I think the average lifespan of a person in America is now like 80 or like 70 something. I don't know. Somewhere like that. It's not forever though. So, if you're going to have a lineage and a king that lasts forever, it's probably not going to be something that is just human. This is what they're waiting for. This is the hope he speaks into, this branch from the Davidic line that will come back to rule the kingdom of Israel forever. This is the hope he speaks into. All seems lost for the people in this moment, but God is still faithful to this promise made to David, that the house of David could be cut down, but that God is able to bring life out of this death, that a branch will sprout. So how does a kingdom then endure forever? I kind of already said this, but we're going to blow the doors off of it a little more clearly. This is the messianic hope. This is the promise of Advent. This is what we're waiting for in this season between our trees. That's the point. This descendant that will reign forever and ever can't simply be a human, and the kingdom cannot simply be a human kingdom anymore. That the long-awaited Messiah would come to restore the Davidic kingship. In Jeremiah's words, they would be a righteous branch that arises out of deadness of a nation of Israel. Now, David's line didn't return to the throne. This passage and the other ones we're going to look at speak about a coming ideal ruler. The descendant of David who will execute justice and righteousness in the land, and the one who even we wait for in an Advent season. And that his salvation encompasses not just Judah and Jerusalem, but the entirety of the world, all of creation. That new life would spring from a fallen dynasty. That under a Messiah's rule, God's promises of righteousness and justice will be fulfilled. In other words, the confidence that Jeremiah has for Israel's salvation is not on account of Israel. It's not on account of the current steward of the kingdom that he's speaking to, but it's on God himself to follow through on the promise made to David. That God is the sovereign and loving father of a completely wayward nation. And that surely salvation will come to those who hope, who wait for them to return. The New Testament clearly identifies Jesus as this righteous branch. And Paul in Romans 22, they quote from the prophet Isaiah when they say, the root of Jesse will come, even he who arises to rule the Gentiles, and in him the Gentiles will also find their hope. Or Revelation 22:16, one of my favorite little sections of the whole of Revelation. John gives Jesus' own words through the apocalyptic vision. He says, I, Jesus, have sent the angel to testify to you about these things in the churches, that I, the root of David, have come to bore the morning star. This is where this lineage comes through that Jesus speaks into. If you're ever curious why Jesus gets arrested and crucified, it's because he claimed to be the inheritance of this kingdom. Advent, especially Christmas, are celebrations of the fulfillment of this promise made to the kingdom of Israel to bring forth the branch of righteousness to the fallen nation. And that he is the one who will bring righteousness and justice not just to Israel but to all nations. And so like Israel, who were sent to exile, overwhelmed by the invading giant armies, we still are waiting for the full fulfillment of all those promises. We're stuck in between two trees. We're in the waiting room. And that brings us full circle to this expectation of Advent. I mean, the purpose of Advent is not the religious equivalent to the big retail stores getting decorated to get us in the mood for Christmas. Advent's not sentimental. It's the purpose of Advent is to point us to this message of hope that enables those of us in this exile between the two trees to press through the difficulty of waiting for the here and now, but also the not yet. This reminder that all Christians, that our journey begins by waiting. By waiting. The word Advent, to come, to arrive. The focus is on this ceremonial entrance, this return of a ruler to the city. This return of Christ again. And in the season of Advent, we remember Israel's long wait for this coming Messiah. 400 or so years. But we also join them in their waiting because we too await the return, the Advent, the second one. That on the day that he arrives, all the promises will be fulfilled forevermore. And here's the thing. Much like these lights in this room, we are not good at waiting. We don't see a lot of purpose in waiting. I'm horribly impatient. I'm the embodiment of not liking to wait. We're in a culture that desires instant gratification. The other day I ordered a probe thermometer. It was like a double, Bluetooth fancy. Because I make the turkey for Thanksgiving, and my old thermometer died, my probe thermometer. And I used to have to pull the turkey out, and I put it back in. And I was like, what if I just didn't have to open the door? So I ordered it on Amazon the day before Thanksgiving, in the morning. And it said, arrives by 3 in the morning on Thanksgiving morning. And I was like, that's awesome. That's the coolest thing. 2 days, whatever. I thought that was so cool. It didn't arrive until after Thanksgiving. And I want you to know, I was not happy about it because I wanted that instant, I wanted it. You know what I mean? I don't like to wait. This is what we get. Amazon is free 2-day shipping, and we're like, that's not fast enough. You used to have to drive to go to places. I remember as a kid, you'd flip through magazines and you'd call and place You're nodding like you used to call on a landline, but you called and you would be like, page 53, I don't know. You know exactly what I'm saying, right? And so you do this. I don't like it. We invented the microwave oven, guys. The microwave. I asked my mom one time how long you had to microwave a turkey. I thought she was going to drop on the floor. Fast food, online streaming services. We can pick what we want to watch when we want to watch it. You don't need to wait an entire week or a whole year to see the next episode of your favorite TV show. Ashley and I watched all 4 episodes of Stranger Things the night they came out. We went to bed at 1:30 in the morning. I regretted it on Thanksgiving. I did, obviously. You can binge watch everything you want. So you get wrapped up in this instant gratification, and we forget that the message in this instant culture that spreads tells us you can have anything you want when you want it on your own terms, and you don't really have to put any effort into it. And so for us in Advent, the temptation is that we can unintentionally begin to apply that thinking into the between trees as well. Unless we learn to wait, we'll always believe that salvation itself is something I can accomplish for myself. With more effort, with more money, with more technology, with more power, if it could be done faster, if I could invent the machine, the truth should make us reflect on what we actually do and what we actually seek to gain from the things we do at Christmas time. From gift giving to gathering of families for a feast, have you realized that only Jesus could bring us Christmas? Gifts, gathering, sentimentality, familiar rituals, none of it does it. Do we wait for him, and do we look for him alone? Because unless you stop long enough to actually experience the wait, you don't gain perspective on the real brokenness of this world that so desperately needs us in it. Life is easy when you do it on your own terms. When life hits with the equivalent of a traffic jam in rush hour, you have to stop, evaluate the needs of others. And so like Israel, surrounded by Assyria, we patiently wait for God to fulfill the things that he said he would do. A plot of land that we are promised will be worth something someday. And that is ultimately Christ-centered because the fulfillment centers on him. Much like Jeremiah, the words are spoken in a time where we experience loss. Job, security, home, family, whatever it would be. We don't have invading armies on our doorstep, but we have the same sense of fear and hopelessness that grips Jeremiah when awaiting the invaders on our doorstep. I don't think I'm saying anything too crazy. And so as you celebrate Advent and Christmas, we know full well that not all the forced Christmas cheer could cover up or compensate for the gloominess and the raw tragedies we live in this world. These are the fault lines that run through families that make holiday gatherings something, far away from the perfect painting that we would imagine. Jeremiah locked up in a courtyard that he can't get out of. The spiral of events that devastate our ability to feel as secure and wait as patiently as we feel like we would want to. It's not easy to wait and speak hope into those situations. Still, like Jesus in Luke 21 says, the ultimate future really does contain a world of hope. And Jeremiah in his 33rd chapter reminds us that even in the midst of life's worst woes, even in a time of collapsing securities and disorienting, God has a word. A small branch from what seems like death. The last word. And that tragedies do come, but do not define us. That God will not be thwarted by unemployment, disease, poverty, or even death itself. They're not meant to be isolated from Jeremiah or emblazoned on some cross-stitched wall hanging that pretties up your den, but they have a context. Hope spoken out of the death and tragedy of the world. I saw this, and this is how I wanted to wrap up today, but it's been nearly 15 years since the East Coast experienced Superstorm Sandy. Do you remember this? The giant big storm on the East Coast. And that year, in a series of remarks made by an otherwise silly national holiday of pardoning a turkey, which is my favorite American thing that ever happens, President Obama mentioned that he had met a man in New York City in one of the areas devastated by the storm, and that houses everywhere around him had been smashed over by waters and trees and flattened, and it was a disaster everywhere. But the man's own house had been hit by a falling 30-foot pine tree. But as the cleanup crews broke down the tree and removed it, he saved the top 7 feet of his tree and planted it upright in his front yard as a little pre-Christmas Christmas tree. A little sign of hope. It's a very famous photo. You can find it. It's wildly cool photo. And he dug out a few surviving ornaments and decorated up his front yard. And soon the neighbors added a few things themselves: surgical masks, battered coffee cups. It was a sign of resilience, a sign of hope to rebuild in the midst of devastation. A righteous branch will spring up in devastation. It's a word of hope, but not naive. Jeremiah was not someone who looked at the world through rose-colored glasses, but a prophet imprisoned by his own government who kept prophesying what was to come, that a righteous branch would spring up. A saving act of God was not readily apparent to Jeremiah or Judah's current situation as they dreaded an imminent arrival of their enemies' armies. But a righteous branch would spring up. The word of tenacious hope spoken to counteract all of the life-sapping, despair-inducing evidence to the contrary. That's power. The same proclamation is given to us today, the inheritors of Jeremiah's task, to speak a word of hope and promise in a world often filled with fear and uncertainty. Especially in the season of Advent, we speak a word of hope, of patient waiting. And as we begin this Advent season, it's maybe not too much of a theological stretch to suggest that what God did by sending his own Son here in human flesh was rather like a pre-Christmas tree in devastated New York, and rather like the plot of ground that Jeremiah had purchased. That in the midst of a devastated world, God carves out a piece of literal human real estate in the form of his own incarnate Son's body. And it stood and stands for us now in heaven as a sign of this future hope, of resilience, of defined intention to take the sin-battered world and rebuild. In the midst of darkness, light is about to break in. In the midst of despair, hope erupts. And after a long waiting, a branch will sprout. The complete fulfillment of the promise has not yet happened, but it is coming. Such is Advent faith, and Advent hope. Let's pray.